Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Much like yesterday, we're going to be kicking this video off with news of Microsoft's Xbox Scarlett, specifically the two distinct SKUs, both Anaconda and Lockhart, because a fairly detailed picture can now be painted of the performance of these machines thanks to some leaks from Windows Central. I'll of course link their article in the description of the video. So yesterday I reported a series of rumours concerning the specifications of Xbox Scarlett from a couple of leaks online, plus as well Jason Schreier. Now, what's really interesting about Windows Central is they report that they have gotten these specifications from several different sources, which is obviously a good thing. More sources equal, generally speaking, more accurate information. And what's really interesting with all of this is that the information that they've received seems to tally up with some of the more reliable reports regarding, say, Jason Schreier, plus of course general information on the internet, plus as well seems quite accurate based upon what we know about the PlayStation 5. So, let's start things out with the processor. The CPU specifically has 8 processor cores and they are clocked at 3.5 GHz, which is actually a little faster, to be honest with you, than I expected. I was kind of thinking about 3.0 to 3.2, so that is a little faster than what I anticipated, and that's pretty good. Apparently, both consoles are going to have pretty much identical processors, but Anaconda has a slightly higher clock frequency per core than Lockhart. Unfortunately, there's no information regarding the architecture. We do know that it is Zen-based, but the generation of Zen is still ambiguous. I've been told, and I've covered this in a leak video, that it is basically Zen 2, albeit with enhancements. To clarify, if you did miss that video, enhancements do not mean improvements to, let's say, IPC. Instead, it's going to, generally speaking, mean lower power consumption, and naturally as well, it's going to put out less heat. I also expect that there's probably going to be some other tweaks to the architecture, though that's not what my source told me, who was a Bits and Chips. I did credit him in my leak video. Instead, I suspect we're going to see a cut in the level 3 cache, because, quite frankly, the level 3 cache of the Zen 2 CPU is just absolutely ginormous in terms of the sheer amount of size it takes on a die. So cutting that down to, let's say, half the size, 16 megabytes per 8 CPU cores rather than 32 megabytes, would be a pretty good compromise in terms of, well, just about everything really. It probably wouldn't impact games a huge amount, given that they're going to have lots of memory bandwidth with GDDR6 memory. Furthermore, it would also save a lot of space on an APU, assuming they are going the APU route, which hasn't been completely confirmed yet, but it's very likely, which would obviously be utilised in other things, such as additional compute units for the GPU. Anyway, moving on, apparently the Anaconda, which is once again the highest end SKU, is going to be about 4 to 5 times faster than the Xbox One X, if the targets are met. Unfortunately, faster is a very ambiguous term. And what is that? Is that going to be like read speeds from the NVMe SSD kind of thing? Or does it mean peak performance, higher resolutions? Like, how exactly are they qualifying that statement? What criteria are they using? But I'm assuming they mean just general peak performance, which I can kind of get behind. Furthermore, Anaconda is going to have at least 13 gigabytes of memory allocated for games, 3 gigabytes extra, is going to be for the OS. So there's 16 gigabytes total. There's no mention on memory bus width, and there is no mention of clock frequency, although of course we can probably guess it's going to be a 256-bit bus, most likely, and will also most likely be using GDDR6 memory, and probably say that it's going to be clocked at around 14 Gbps, maybe a little bit more. So we can probably say around 450 gigabytes per second, maybe going up to, let's say, 512 gigabytes per second at the top end in terms of memory bandwidth. This memory is going to be unified, so of course that means textures and other stuff which will be used for graphical assets will also snuggle up nicely to basic game code. Furthermore, Microsoft have also said, of course, officially, that the SSD can be utilized as virtual RAM. Oh, and unsurprisingly, both of these systems will sport an NVMe SSD, and this, of course, is going to be rather influential in how games are developed. They've also said that a lot of games are also going to be cross-generational, but Lockhart and Anaconda require a new API, which is part of the Game Core OS. It's also going to be part of the Windows Core OS that has also been extensively covered in leaks anyway. Scarlett will be able to run everything that is available for the Xbox One today. This also means that any games which are currently available in the backwards compatibility catalogue, so let's say an Xbox original game, an Xbox 360 game, you get the idea, that will also function rather lovingly on either Lockhart or Anaconda. Oh, and speaking of Lockhart and Anaconda, one final thing in terms of the specifications. So the TFLOPS, because everyone loves a good flop, right? The performance of Lockhart is said to be around 4 teraflops, which actually matches up very well with a leak from Jason Schreier. Remember, according to his information, it's around the 4 TFLOP range, which is essentially identical to that of the PlayStation 4 Pro, although there are some major caveats there, including, of course, completely different generation of GPUs. But also, it would make sense given the fact that there's said to be quite a gulf in performance between the two machines. What about Anaconda then? Well, that is going to be around the 12 teraflop range. Unfortunately, we have no information regarding the actual layout of the GPU, so we don't know whether it's going to be lots of compute units, but they run at a more sedate pace, or whether we're going to have a really fast GPU clock, let's say 1.8, 2 gigahertz, similar to the PlayStation 5, but have comparatively fewer compute units. It's going to be fascinating what these next generation consoles are capable of. I know that consoles are less of an interest for a lot of my viewers, but frankly I'm really interested because they obviously are a massive influence in technology, game development, bloody blah blah. So I really look forward to it. I'll also be doing a more in-depth dive on these specifications because now I feel that we've got a pretty good indication of what both of these machines will be capable of. So I'm going to start working on that over the next few days as I've got a couple of reviews to do. So while the benchmarks are running, I can do that. And now a final few stories that I really wanted to cover. The first of which is from videocards.com. You might remember that we did cover the fact that the RX 5600 is apparently a thing. Actually, videocards.com were fed that information exclusively, so full credit to them. However, there is a lot of ambiguity what the RX 5600 is. But one thing we do know is that there are entries now on the ECC, but these are for both ASRock and also we have some models for Gigabyte. But it's a bit confusing because Asus are also referencing 8GB models, whereas the other two companies that I just mentioned, ASRock and Gigabyte, are both 6GB models. What die would be featured inside the RX 5600? My guess, and the guess of quite a few people, is it's a cut-down variant of Nave 10, which would make an awful lot of sense, given, well, even if they have fairly decent yields for Nave 10, which of course is the GPU found inside the RX 5700 and 5700 XT, they can still have some silicon which just doesn't make that grade. So they could then repurpose that for the RX 5600, cut down the number of CU even further, as well, along with the accompanying texture mapping units and so on and so on. Plus, presumably, that would be how they got the 192-bit bus, which we would see on a 6GB card. But that means it's really puzzling why Asus are referring to an 8GB model. This means that either Asus has done a typo, which is, possible, human error does occur, especially if you've been doing lots of inventory, or you've been trying to, do lots of filing, and it's just really easy to be like, oops. But it's highly possible that happens. Or another potential possibility is that we have two different SKUs, and one of them does have a 256-bit bus, and then there would also be a SKU which has a 192-bit bus. Another potential possibility is that they have memory chips which are essentially sharing the same bus. So that would be basically a mixed and match configuration. I can't remember honestly whether I've read anything whether RDNA architecture is capable of doing that. It's certainly one potential where they could do it, but unfortunately I don't remember offhand whether RDNA is capable of doing that. So personally I believe it's probably a typo by Asus, but it's going to be interesting what exactly they price these GPUs at. At the end of the day, we still don't even have official pricing of the RX 5500, although some of the more expensive RX 5500 cards are actually being rumoured to be over $200, which is, well, kind of expensive, honestly. I mean, I think it was like $220 for one of the really high-end ones, and it's kind of like, the problem I have with those type of prices on the really high-end SKUs is, yeah, I get it, there's premium silicon, it's kind of clocked to the highest potential speed you can get for that class of card, and I do appreciate that. The issue is, it's like, yeah, but for like another $60-$70, particularly when you had the holiday sales, holiday sales coming up, and also Black Friday, which has recently gone, we had cards of the RX 5700 and NVIDIA alternatives for like the $280 to $300 mark. So it's kind of like, once you start getting to like really close to the next tier of cards, you might as well just save your pennies. That's a really good discussion point, actually. What do you guys feel about buying the really high-end premium model of a card, or do you just buy the really basic kind of entry level for that particular price point? So for example, do you go with the really custom PCB and really awesome triple fan cooler, or do you just go with the basic reference design because it saves you quite a bit of money? Let me know your thoughts. And now the final piece of news for today, the i9-10900K in all of its 10-core glory, along with the accompanying Z490 platform, will launch in April 2020, according to website HKPEC. This launch date of April is actually a month or two later than a couple of other rumoured launch dates. So we've seen reports for both February as well as March, but we can essentially say that this processor is not going to debut much later than late Q1/early Q2. The other reports have also said that Intel are going to provide a lot more detail to what their plans are, and this is going to be at CES 2020, which of course takes place in January. As an aside, CES 2020 is also supposedly going to be when we learn a lot more details of the next generation of RDNA GPUs from AMD as well, so definitely stick with us here at Red Gaming Tech if you want a lot of information on that, as we're going to be covering it, of course, extensively. There is also going to be some tweaks to the platform itself, that is, of course, for Z490. Not least of all is a new socket, LGA1200. There are also some reports, and I've covered those quite recently, that the LGA1200 platform could also be forwards compatible with Rocket Lake. Rocket Lake is going to launch about a year later, and it is going to be on the 14nm process, but it's not going to be using Skylake architecture. Well, at least that's what several rumours are floating around say, and also a couple of my sources have told me it is also a backport of either Willow Cove or Sunny Cove, because there seems to be a lot of ambiguity and a lot of a lot of confusion of which one's accurate, whether it's Willow Cove or Sunny Cove. Personally, I'm leaning towards Willow Cove, because by that point, Sunny Cove would be a kind of old architecture to backport, but who knows? Who knows? Who knows what's going on at this point with Intel? Anyway, the fact is that Comet Lake and Rocket Lake are going to be up to 10 processor cores, and hyper-threading, I really can't speak today, is going to be featured extensively for these processors, because even the i3 processors have 4 cores, 8 threads, which means that one of these CPUs, which of course once again launches in 2020, is going to be basically the equivalent of an i7 6700K. Quite honestly, I think hyper-threading being available on every single SKU is something that Intel should have done from the beginning. I think they should have simplified their lineup a little bit, and then just had hyper-threading available for everything. Maybe apart from the really cheap chips, you know, like the very kind of bargain basement entry-level Core i3s, and of course Pentiums, okay, maybe not enable hyper-threading for those, but everything else, like, it kind of irked me, I'm not going to lie, that the 9700K didn't have hyper-threading. I think they could have segmented their lineup a little bit better, and for the 9th generation they could have had a 6-core, 12-thread, and so on and so on. But you know what, I'm going to get really on a tangent on that, so I'm going to stop before I start going on a rant. Anyway though, yeah, so just bear in mind that if you do want to go Intel, and you know, there are definitely some usage cases which Intel do have advantages, particularly when it comes to high frame rate and blah blah blah. And hey, some people just prefer Intel no matter what AMD do, so if that's your thing, I'm not going to judge you, it's your money, but just be aware that the 10900K will launch most likely around April, so, you know, I'm not saying don't buy the 9900K, but just be aware that in about 3 months' time it could be kind of old hat. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. The normal stuff if you did, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.